This is ridiculous, as contract-wise, the Islanders have been named one of the least efficient teams in the entire NHL. And I'm going to give you my thoughts on this episode of Islanders Digest, as there are some contracts, especially signed by Lou Lamoriello from the Islanders, that are absolutely abysmal. But there are also some other ones that I think are getting a bit too much hate, and perhaps the Islanders contract situation, while not ideal, is not as bad as it's being made out to be. Really quickly, before we get into all these contracts, our goal is 2,000 subscribers before the NHL season starts. We are getting closer and closer to that goal. Appreciate all of you who have been supporters of the channel. Your support means a lot. Now let's talk about these Islanders contracts. And right off the bat, we've talked about a few of these. I did not realize this was that bad. In fact, we're going to talk a little more about some of these names. In fact, I think some of these contracts are not as bad as they're being made out. One in particular is Ilya Sorokin is considered to have negative value. Stats do not always tell the full story when it comes to trying to evaluate a player's contract. I think most teams in the NHL would do a lot to get Ilya Sorokin on their team. I can imagine the Edmonton Oilers would move the sun and the moon to try to get a goaltender of his caliber. So perhaps that one is a bit unfair. I think his 8.25 salary cap is more than reasonable, providing how many games he plays for the Islanders. It'd be a different case scenario if he had his numbers and just could not play a full season. This is a guy who's available every single day. But let's talk about some of these other contracts, and one we actually talked about recently that is considered to be one of the worst contracts in the entire NHL is the contract of Ryan Pulock. And this is one, when I talked about it in a previous video, I got some pushback saying that, well, Ryan Pulock does do things well. And I'm not saying when I say he has one of the worst contracts in the NHL that he is a complete useless player. For the right price, of course, unlike some players on this list we're going to get into in just a second, there is value in having Ryan Pulock. It's just the simple fact that he's signed for the next 5 years. I truly believe at this point he's playing more like a $2.53 million defenseman. This chart agrees with that analysis, and he's getting paid $6.2 million. It's too much for a player. What he's doing at this point, I think when he signed the contract at the time, which is why I try not to rag too much on this deal, because I was a big supporter of it at the time, and I thought it was going to age a lot better than it has. Ryan Pulock has not played to what you expect, and as a result, he is considered one of the worst contracts in the NHL. And while I'm curious to see what some of those other contracts look like, it's hard to argue that you're getting fair value with Ryan Pulock. And this is something that's kind of a theme with the Islanders, because a lot of times you get a lot of pushback when you go individual players saying, like, oh, this guy's not overpaid, this guy's not overpaid. Like, the analytics are being too harsh. But when you look at the entire picture together, there is a bit of a concerning picture that is painted, because if you think about it, the Islanders have under $2 million of cap space this season. If you compare them to every single team in the NHL, they are in the top 10 of spending. And that's pretty notable, because while I have made arguments, and I will continue to make arguments as we get closer to the start of the season, that this Islanders team can be a 15 to 17 range wild card type team, we have not been having any conversations about this team being in the top 10, and yet they're spending some of the most money in the entire NHL. And what's worth noting, in addition, when you look at some of the top teams like Vegas, Montreal, they have a lot of money wrapped in LTIR. With the Islanders, all this money is currently on the roster. We'll see whether or not Varlamov starts the season, but it's pretty clear based on what Darche has said and what Varlamov has said that his plan is to come back next season. So starting the year off, none of this money is going to be on LTIR. This is just what the Islanders roster is. And it's a little concerning when it comes to where the money is going, and more importantly, how long these contracts are. Because look, it'd be one thing, some of these contracts that have negative value, it's kind of stupid. Like, it says Jean-Gabriel Pageau and Anders Lee are slightly overpaid. And yeah, you can make the argument that you're definitely playing a premium for those players. But there's only 1 year left in that contract. And when the trade deadline comes, believe me, there will be callers for both those players if they continue to play at their level. So contracts like that are not so bad. In the same way where contracts like Tony DeAngelo, being the Islanders' most valuable defensive contract, It being 1 year, yeah, there's a little bit of surplus value. Again, some of that also comes with his off-ice problems, but that's not really big. What's more concerning is they don't have a lot of longer term contracts with long term value, with the exception being Matt Barzal. Most of their other longer term contracts are offering you, at least on the ice, on analytically, less than what you're paying for. With the best long-term contract from a defenseman actually being, other than Tony DeAngelo, Adam Pelech, which is actually something interesting. So I actually made the argument in a couple videos, especially earlier in the offseason. So I think the value of Adam Pelech is a lot higher than some fans believe. A lot of people are talking about just dumping his cap. And I made the argument that, hey, Adam Pelech, while he is frustrating, he is still one of the better defensemen in the NHL. And these analytics actually support that assessment, with him actually having only $1.7 million of negative surplus, saying he pretty much is what you're paying for. And I do think Adam Pelech is going to be a trade candidate in the future. Interestingly enough, out of all these contracts, most of the bad ones, which is actually the one positive thing I think I take out of this entire list, most of the bad ones were signed by Lou Lamoriello. Contracts like Pierre Engvall for 7 years. I still don't understand what Lou Lamoriello was thinking signing a depth player. Not even a great depth player at that. A depth player for 7 seasons. But you look at some of the best contracts, it's actually a lot of the work that Matthew Darche did this offseason. Maxim Siplikov, which I said I think is a very good value contract, got some pushback on that. Analytics, and the analytics, again, are not anything. I disagree with what they're saying about Sorokin, but analytics seem to agree with me on that one. I also said Jonathan Drouin was a pretty big steal for the Islanders. Just a 2-year contract, but the surplus over $2.7 million in that contract. That's another really good contract. Holmstrom, I would have liked them to get another year on him, but in the 2 years they got, good value there. Heineman, another contract signed by Matthew Darche, $2 million of surplus value, and that's where it kind of ends. We've talked recently about Anthony Duclair being a player who is looking like that contract is going to age badly. The analytics seem to reflect that. One I'm also going to push back a little bit on is Kyle Palmieri. It says, part of this too is Kyle Palmieri is getting older, but at $4.1 million, I don't think that's really a bad contract, especially considering how you can move it next season. I don't hate that contract, and that is a contract that, while Darche did sign it, it was kind of left over from Lou Lamoriello. Don't hate that one all too much. The one I'm actually going to push back the most when it comes to the grading of all these contracts is Bo Horvat. This says that Bo Horvat is a negative contract, gives it a C grade, and that it is not going to age well. I've been beyond pleased with Bo Horvat's production over the last few years, especially considering the talent on this team, the talent that he plays with, being able to reliably put up the points he does when he's playing with wingers that, let's face it, should not be playing on a first line. Bo Horvat, I think, is getting a little undervalued with this ranking, and that's just how these analytics are going to be. Analytics are great, but they can't ever tell the full picture. However, when you look at a team like the Islanders and there's so much negative, and you compare them to the other teams spending similar amounts to them, teams like the Florida Panthers, even the New York Rangers, and you look at just not the team as a whole, but the talent each team has, you can definitely see that the Islanders are not getting the best bang for their buck when it comes to contract. Again, they don't have a single contract that has an A grade where they're getting significant value into the future. And I do think that is a fair assessment. I don't think there's any contract on the Islanders where I'm like, wow, I can't believe we signed that contract. It's more of a, you look at Pierre Engvall, it's like, wow, I cannot believe we signed that contract. One final player I do want to talk about is Alexander Romanov. Alexander Romanov is considered by this ranking to be one of the negative contracts on the Islanders. Again, signed for an 8-year extension this offseason. And personally, I really disagree with that assessment, especially considering with how the cap is going up and the role he plays. I actually view Alexander Romanov's contract as one that is going to age well, but you could make the argument that perhaps for a defenseman who plays his role, maybe it is a little high. I'd love to know what you think about the Alex Romanov contract in the comments below, and all of these contracts in general. Do you think there are any contracts that are being too harshly rated? Do you think there are any contracts that aren't being rated harshly enough? One I do find funny is in terms of goaltending. It seems to think that David Rittich is the most effective goaltender contract wise for the Islanders, and yeah, they did sign him for $1 million. But I guarantee there are going to be some points in the season where you watch Big Save Dave play, and you are going to regret spending even $1 on that contract. But then with Varlamov, I do think their assessment is rare that is correct at this point. That is a big money sink. The first year it looked really good. I'd love to see him bounce back. Not quite sure what's going to happen there, but yeah, I'd love to know your thought on the Islanders contract situation in general. One other optimistic point that I have to bring up, because yeah, looking at some of these longer term contracts, Casey Cizikas for the next 2 years at $2.5 million, it can look a little grim. I do have to remind you, all these young players who are going to be coming up in the next few seasons, they're all going to be on entry level contracts. You got Shabanov on entry level contract, Matthew Schaefer, Cole Eiserman at some point, Callum Ritchie. So those entry level contracts are definitely going to help the Islanders mitigate some of these contract concerns. And you all can also hope that Matt Barzal has a big bounce back season, because if he goes back to scoring 82 points in 82 games, considering how the NHL has really elevated how much point per game players are paid, that $9.2 million I think is going to look a lot better than it already does. But those are my thoughts on the Islanders contract situation. I'll catch you on the next episode of Islanders Digest. I'm your host, Patrick Nilan. Let's go Islanders.